Welcome to the Rabbi and the Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Gurri, the Shrink, and here's my favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
Well, the good rabbi and I have with us Mary Kutheis. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
Hi, Mary.
We're delighted, actually. Today, we're talking about linking thinking to long-term success. And I know you were on the Rabbis Grappling with the Great podcast, and he said how excited you were about when he asked about axiogenics. So I thought, why don't we start there? And then I'll brag a little about you. So tell us, why are you so excited about axiogenics?
Well, most people haven't heard of the term axiogenics. It's fairly new. And what it is the axiology is the science of value. And neuroscience, as we know, is a study of the brain. So when you bring the science of value and the study of the brain together, you get axiogenics. And essentially what it is how we think. So how we think is at the root of everything we do. I mean, if you put that practically, think about something that you do that doesn't start in your brain, doesn't start with thinking. Unconsciously or consciously or subconsciously, it's all there. So when we can have more understanding about how we think, and we can be more proactive about thinking in ways that are helpful, we can change all sorts of results, not only for ourselves, but for our community and the world at large.
There's a story I heard. I remember where I heard it was on Tom Bilyeu's podcast. I don't remember who was telling it. He was telling about someone who became a very, very successful publisher. And he had been an unsuccessful high school student and figured he may not even graduate, was going to find some menial job. And he got his SAT score back, and he got in the 1300s, 1400s. And he thought, wow, I never did well in anything before. Maybe I'm not as dumb as I think I am. And he started working a little bit. And he finished high school strong, went to college, did well, became extremely successful in business. And I think it was something like 10 or 15 years later, he got a letter from the SAT board. And it said, we're letting you know there was an error in the results. And this is your real score. And it was like in the 900s.
Oh, no.
Wow.
And, he just looked back on this and he thought, because I thought I was smart, I started acting smart and I became successful. And if he would have gotten his regular scores back, he would have just confirmed his belief that he was never going to go anywhere in life. And we wouldn't be telling this story right now. But, it just, I think it speaks to the essence of your, how you just summed up axiogenics, this intersection between the story we tell ourselves and who we actually become.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And you think about, most people who've studied any kind of parenting know it's terrible to tell your child you're not a good reader or all those terrible things, because the more we tell them that kind of thing, the more they will absorb it and believe that. And the same thing when they do well, not saying you're so smart, but you put in such effort and it really paid off for you. And then they learn that it's effort, not just natural smarts that got them where they are.
Absolutely. And there's several studies about that. They tell half the people in a room that they're really smart, and then they give them a bunch of hard problems to solve. And then the other half, they tell them, you guys are super hardworking and I know you'll persevere. Well, in the end, the smart kids ended up cheating or quitting because they thought when they couldn't get it that they weren't smart. And the kids who were told that effort was more important kept at it. And so, of course, they did better. So I think that's important. How did you get into all this? So, what were you doing before? I know you're a coach. You have lots of coaching certificates, professional, executive, axiogenics, foundational team coaching. How did you get to this axiogenic part of your life?
Well, I started my business 22 years ago. I was disenchanted with corporate America. And so
No, say it ain't so.
I know. We were in the process of adopting our son. And I thought, boy, I can't go back into a job that I really do not enjoy and put our son that we work so hard to get in daycare and so on. So my husband said, well, quit and figure something else out. So it's kind of morphed over the years, but I have been fascinated since really since I was a little kid about how we think, how we behave, how we as humans communicate and interact. And so it's really all built on itself as this has gone along. And then I had actually been using the hierarchy of value as the assessment. And I had been using it with something else, but it was very dense, very sciencey. And when I came across Peter Demarest and his work, and I thought, oh my goodness, here's this assessment that I think is so brilliant. But what comes out of it is something that the average person can use. That's when I got really excited about it, because you can take this, it's a fairly dense, axiology is a fairly dense science. But the outcome of it, understanding our thinking from both self perspectives and world perspectives, it just can create such enormous shifts for us. And the power behind it is amazing. And even you've probably heard of how important emotional intelligence is, and I completely agree. And as a precursor to that, I mean, because we can change our EQ if we work on it, but if we can learn to change our thinking, it's going to make any other self or professional development that we do better, because at the root of any change we're trying to make is how we think.
Which brings us back to ethics, Rabbi.
Yeah, and it really got me thinking. I mean, it's a continuous form of thought for me, that I come up from a very sort of structured theological orientation. So for me, values are taught, they're handed down. When you talk to people who don't have that religious background or religious foundation or orientation, then values can become a much more complicated conversation. Do you have a way of approaching the concept of what are, whether we call them authentic values or universal values or healthy values? What happens if somebody says, well, my values are X, Y, and Z, and most of us wouldn't actually think of those as appropriate values?
I think we're seeing a lot of it more publicly these days than that at least I have in my lifetime. When we value money, or when we value power, or when we value prestige, all those kinds of things, those are legitimate values, I suppose. And yet they can also be separators, if you will. Someone may value money above all else, but that's going to impact how other people interact with them, and probably narrow the circle to people who find that to be an acceptable value.
And then you're associated with people whose values may not be ultimately healthy. So now you've got the compounded problem of my community is not supporting me in a healthy way either.
Yeah. And they say that old thing, spend your time around the 5 people. You become the 5 people that you spend your time around. So be very careful, choose very carefully. And I think when we are in alignment with our core values, we're in a good place. When we are out of alignment, it's very difficult for us. And just because we have a value doesn't mean we're always in alignment with it, but we try.
Yeah, we do. And I think one of the things that the rabbi have seen, that is, people have more confidence and more emotional intelligence, they're more likely to abandon a fear-based philosophy of, I need more power, so I value power. I need to have all these plastic surgeries because I I value looking good because that's the best I've got, or, things like that. And we're noticing how, and we're trying to contaminate the world with values-based discussions where people have the courage to explore ideas and thoughts that are different from what they thought they had, or different from other people.
I've written some about how, in terms of leadership, what always gets in the way of being a good leader is one or more of the following: power, insecurity, and greed. And insecurity is remarkably at the root of a lot, because an insecure person seeks the power and the money to build up something that they don't have inside.
And that insecurity also leads to more extreme outlooks on life, because those tend to be more simplistic. And if I haven't reasoned my way to a solid outlook that by necessity acknowledges the complexities and the gray areas and the paradoxes and contradictions, that I'm secure with the understanding that life is complicated, then I'm going to retreat into these more simplistic worldviews and associate with people who are similarly simplistic in their views. And now we have groupthink, and we have tribalism, and we have the sort of political mess that we read so much about in the headlines.
Yeah, it's frightening. If you could save the world with a question or something for people to ponder, what would it be? How can you, because I know you talk about little minute or minute shifts. You were talking about this wonderful play on word, very clever. What would be the question that you would have people ponder to inspire that shift?
I'm so glad you asked that.
Well, me too.
As part of axiogenics, there is the central question, and it is at the core of how we choose to move forward at any time. And it is this: what choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value?
Could you say that again? That was profound.
I can. What choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? And a couple of the important things in there is that we don't give value and we don't get value. We create value. We have the ability to create value. And net value doesn't necessarily mean everyone will be happy. For instance, if someone is failing terribly at their job and you've tried and tried and tried to work them through that, but ultimately it's going to be better for the company and the team and the client that they work with, and even maybe the person that's being let go.
I would say, especially the person being let go.
Yes,
it's humiliating and scary, but if we don't belong somewhere, that means somewhere else needs us, or we belong there.
So the even in the moment, if they might not think, oh, this is great for me, but ultimately the net value is better for them because they find a place where they do fit, where they can thrive. And so it's looking at all of those different aspects of any situation where what is not what's the best for me. And also not completely negating oneself and saying what's best for everybody else and nothing matters about me. It's looking at all the pieces and how can we create the greatest net value.
So it's a really empowering message, isn't it?
I'm sorry, Rabbi.
I'm just saying it's an empowering message. I don't feel that I am a victim of circumstance. I don't feel that I really have to just go along with whatever my circumstances are, but rather I become the one who defines the environment I live in, and I take responsibility for the change that I can make in the world. And if more of us feel that way, then we're going to be looking for partners, collaborators, opportunities to take advantage of And society's going to benefit as a whole. We're going to benefit as individuals now.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to create systems to follow that up, because I think sometimes people say, okay, I've thought about my values, I've picked my 5 people, I'm just going to coast. And the problem with coasting is, the Rabbi and I know, and you know, Mary, is that there's ethical fading, and we have to rethink things constantly, asking the question again, what's the right thing to do, what fits. So what are you doing to help people refresh this commitment to the entheogenics?
Well, it's a little bit of a conundrum in this moment, because it's new. In the 90s, emotional intelligence was new. Not very many people had heard of EQ, and now lots and lots and lots of people have. It's a very common thing. Well, VQ is kind of in the 90s EQ stage, where people are just not as, they're not aware of it at all. And then understanding how it applies to one's own development is a little bit of a challenge too. I think there's less than 30 of us that are currently certified in the assessment and the training and that kind of thing. So we're working hard to grow it. And the idea that it's putting the power in the hands of the people to utilize their best ways of thinking. So hopefully people find that intriguing and think it's not about motivational posters or affirmations. It's really about understanding how you think, shifting away from less helpful ways and using our more helpful ways of thinking, which we do naturally, we do habitually, we're just not aware of it.
So tell us about the brain, because we're talking about, the science and the study of the brain as well. What is it we need to remember about the brain if we're going to move forward in the most productive way?
That's a really scary question, because I have a limited knowledge. However, I think the thing that about scientifically about the brain, but I think the one thing that is exciting is the plasticity of the brain. That for a long time, people thought that the way it is the way it is. But what we know now is that we can change neural pathways to ones that are more helpful. In programs, I'll put a picture of a rutted road on the screen. And if you were to be driving your truck down that rutted road in the middle of the field and you let go of the wheel, you'd stay right where those ruts are. The wheels would just keep going. If you wanted to drive somewhere else down that road, you need to steer yourself out of the ruts and you need to hold the wheel there. Ultimately, you will make a new path going a different direction, but it takes some time and it takes some consistency. And so it's the same way with our brains. If we've done things the same way for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years, we've got some pretty deep pathways in our brain. We can shift them, but it doesn't happen in 21 days. And it doesn't happen in 30 days. It's there's not science to back those 21 days to a new habit things up. Yeah. So we can change if we want to, and if we're willing to put the consistent effort. And I think that's exciting.
What are some steps we can take to change?
The first is being aware of our thinking. Have you ever been in one of those situations where I like to call it being wrapped around the spoke of something unhelpful? It's just, maybe you said something or you did something or you forgot something and you just can't, you think about it every day a little bit, or just you realize you've been thinking about it a lot for a week or a month. Well, if we can realize that we're thinking in that pattern, that unhelpful pattern sooner, and proactively shift our way out of it, think about how much stress we'd save. But the problem is our brain kind of goes on its path like it's got a mind of its own. And all of a sudden we realize we've been worried about something for a week, but that hasn't changed anything, the worry or the regret or the whatever. If we could catch it in the first hour and say, let me shift this to a more helpful way of thinking so that it will be useful and I'll be creating value instead of just eating away at my brain for a week.
So what are some other steps then?
The understanding what triggers a person, knowing what your triggers are, knowing whether situations or the way people talk to you or occasions of stage fright or going to a party or all the different kinds of things that can trigger our unhelpful ways of thinking. Because if we know what a trigger is, and then we're aware when we're approaching a trigger, we can be even more proactive about shifting our thinking. The idea, and in fact, it's one of the ideas behind meditation, is simply to be aware of our thinking. I learned several years ago, people get frustrated about meditation because it's like, oh, I can't clear my mind. I can't clear my mind. Well, one of the things about it is it's not really about clearing your mind. Or what I learned, and you probably already know, was when you are focusing on your breathing and then you realize, oh, I'm not focusing on my breathing anymore, you're successfully meditating, because what you're trying to do is being aware of your thoughts and to not let them run away. So if you are meditating for 5 minutes and 30 times in that 5 minutes, you realize you have veered away from focusing on your breath, you're successfully meditating because you're practicing to be aware of your thoughts for longer and longer periods of time.
That's a really interesting point. It was, I heard Daniel Goldman speaking about this in a lecture, and it was a tremendous insight for me. And it's something that really has many ramifications, that what appears to be failure is often success. And to approach meditation with that idea, we know that our thoughts are going to drift. And the whole idea is to catch them as they drift and then bring our focus back. And you mentioned a couple of things that challenge some of the conventional wisdom that's become very popular, the 21-day rewire your brain model. And you also talked about aphorisms, or some have been calling them visualizations. And I've heard a number of people saying that changed their lives when they started the affirmations. Is there a place for that in your model? Or
yes.
Is it? Yeah. So
absolutely. I think, honestly, it's whatever works for someone. I mean, when I was writing my book on time, I think I went out there and there was, I don't know, some crazy million number of books on time management. And the reason that they're out there is because they worked for at least the person who wrote it. Probably more. But there is no one right answer for anything, really. People will differ on just about everything. And if the affirmation worked, great. That's all that matters. The problem that I had with the 21-day, and I talk about this a lot, is because people beat themselves up because they can't succeed at that. I did it for 21 days, and on the 22nd day, I completely forgot. And now, I guess I'm a failure because it didn't work for me. Well, it doesn't work for anybody. I figured out where it came from by accident, where that whole myth started. And it was never meant to be that you could create a new behavioral, a new behavior in 21 days that would stick without thinking about it, because that's
a new habit.
About a habit. Right.
It was about habit development.
Yeah.
I think that it's funny that any of us would think that one thing would work for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
We don't all agree on whether salt is good or not. We can agree on, that Latin music is the best, right, Rabbi? Really. We can't even agree on that.
Hit the play button, Doctor. I'm up.
It's interesting. Well, it's exciting what you're doing. I think that leadership is a great time for folks to understand how much they impact others. And so let's discuss this. So I am a leader and I'm in the audience and I'm wanting to take the assessment, right? That you talked about, Peter Damarist assessment. Did I say his name right?
Yeah, Peter. Well, there's three people: Peter, Demarest, Harvey Schoaf, and Tracy Duez, who created this particular. Robert Hartman created the assessment, but this report that comes out of it was created by those three.
So if I want to take the assessment, what do I get back in this report, and then how does that impact me as a leader?
Well, what comes back in the report is we have 36 different perspectives. And there are 18 worldview and 18 self-view. So in the full report, you find out where you land on these 36 different perspectives. And with that information, there are biases, which are the unhelpful ways of thinking or liabilities, and then there are assets. And so what you learn is what your biases are. We use biases and liabilities as synonymous. You learn what those are, and then through some self-reflection, you learn what triggers those ways of thinking. And then you become more aware of your assets, because both your biases and your assets are habitual. We think that way without even knowing we're thinking that way. So if we can proactively say, oh, here I am with a bias, this isn't good. Asking yourself the central question, what choice can I make and action can I take? Well, in this moment, I can shift to this asset that is a much more helpful way to approach this than the way I was. And so that's key, that's foundational to the training. And it's called self-leadership, because we've all run into ineffective leaders out there. And one of the challenges is that if we can't lead ourselves, how can we effectively lead other people? It happens, but we'd be so much better if we understood ourselves before we start trying to lead others.
That doesn't seem to be a requirement for many people in leadership positions.
Sadly, no.
I vote that they all take this assessment and be invited to ponder thoughtfully. That would be good. Well, Rabbi, we've been talking about some lovely things. I'm thinking it's time for the word of the day.
Word of the day. I'm actually debating between two, but I think I'm going to choose Macamadize.
I don't know that one.
Uh-oh.
I don't think I pronounced it right.
That's okay. I wouldn't know.
We're going to try one. We've got to be ethical here.
So if we don't know, is it wrong? I mean, really?
Well,
if we're going to be magical in our thinking.
When the word is epistemology, then we can get into that discussion.
Epistemology, okay.
Macamadize. No. We may have to edit this out. No, I got it right. Macadamize. There we go.
Macadamize.
All right, we'll get there sooner or later.
All right. Well, what the heck is it?
Has nothing to do with Hawaiian nuts.
Well, what a shame, because that I knew. That's the fork I knew.
It means to pave by laying and compacting successive layers of broken stone.
Oh.
You guessed I was going to talk about this.
Not at all. Thank you.
But it occurred to me, Mary, because you used the example of the rutted road. And the two kinds of roads. One kind of road will steer us where we want to go without us doing much work. But if we want to change course, it's going to be very difficult. And we also talked about how apparent failure is often success, or that puts us on the path to success. So the idea of taking broken stones, which are generally thought of as rubble or waste or something that has no use, finding a way to repurpose those and to put them in a context where now they become something that is beneficial. Just because we see that situations around us are broken, maybe we feel we're broken at times because we haven't succeeded. But out of that failure, and I often quote Winston Churchill, that the definition of success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. To take those broken pieces and put them together, we can often create something that is going to lead us forward in ways that may ultimately be more beneficial than had things gone smoothly for us in the beginning.
Yeah. The challenging way is always going to be more educational, especially if you're going to help other people come along that path behind you. If it was easy, then there won't be any understanding of the challenges that other people face.
Yeah, they often say that the best coaches were more mediocre players, because the natural athletes don't really know how to teach other people to be successful. They just went out there and did it. The ones who really struggled, they're the ones who learned the process and can now use that to teach others.
Failure's a good teacher.
And the idea of using the broken rocks it also kind of goes back to letting nothing go to waste. Everything has a use, everything has a value if we just look at it properly.
And yet look at how often, speaking of EQ, look at how often people full of shame or blame and hide the mistakes they've made. They distort the failures to be someone else's fault or all their fault. And they don't understand that they're making useful rubble. And they decide that it's not meaningful, so they distort it. I mean, look at all those athletes or other famous leaders who cheat, who distort the facts, who do all sorts of things because somehow they're not valuing the rubble of just everyday experience. It's interesting.
Kind of goes back to that whole insecurity thing. When we can be vulnerable and admit our shortcomings or the time when we did not live up to our own values.
Well, and let's go beyond admit to revel in our mistakes, revel in our value struggles. I think admit goes back to shame and blame.
That's a good point.
Let's revel in it. You know, my father used to ask, what's the best mistake you made today? At the dinner table. And we talk about it. My father was a Freudian shrink. I know you can smell it on me. But we'd ask questions like that. So what was the best mistake that president made or whoever was on TV at the moment? What do you think happened with everyone in the world when they saw that mistake? Questions like that, like you would think about the 360 point of view. And I think that's what crushed leaders, sorry, bad pun, Rabbi. I think crushed leaders often don't look at what was the advantage of my mistake and how did it impact people positively. So they hide the mistakes or shift the blame to someone else.
I often look for biblical references, but the first king of Israel was King Saul, and he was not successful. And the sages explained that he had lived kind of a charmed life before he became king. He was tall, he was handsome, he was talented. People adored him and revered him. And when he became king, he was untested. And so he didn't have confidence in himself, back again to our insecurity. And so he relied too much on his advisors, and his advisors became obsessed with their own power, and they misled him and eventually led him into failure. He was succeeded by King David. And King David had a very difficult youth. He had struggled. He had not been respected. He had to overcome tremendous obstacles. And when he became king, he was poised to now step up to that leadership role. because he'd come through so much. He was confident in his own abilities. And so, we really do, like, if we take it into child raising, these terminologies that have become popular, the helicopter parent who hovers, or the drill sergeant parent who says, we're going to do this and do that. And now they talk about the snowplow parent who just wants to push all the obstacles out of the way. We're not doing our children a service by not letting them fail and learn from their failures. That's what leadership really is. It's empowering others to be the best they can be.
One of the worst things that people seem to think they can call others is a flip-flopper, changing their opinion because they decided something one way 10 years ago and now they think differently. And I think, boy, what about a person who can say, you know what, I got new information and now I think differently. I think that's actually a pretty smart thing. And also to be willing to say, I've changed my mind. I think that says a whole lot about a person.
I think so too. And especially if they can say, in view of new experiences or new information, new data, new whatever, new ponderings, that is not just a flip-flop. It may look like a flip-flop. I love people who are always growing. I think it's very exciting. It's fun to talk about the changes. Around the time of COVID, many people were so embarrassed that they couldn't pay their bills and stuff. But many people say, hey, I was struggling and this is what I did. And those are the people who had, I think, more authentic leadership, because we followed those people. They were scared and they admitted it and they moved forward. So I think that what you're giving is a model for people to love themselves and ponder fearlessly.
I love that, how that sounds.
The rabbi and I are big fans of pondering.
I could have been a professional ponderer.
I think maybe you are actually.
There's people who sit around in coffee shops and just chat and talk about things. And that would have been a great way to live.
Let's start a think tank. Let's start a think tank.
Well, there you go. Or maybe
just get funding.
Or maybe a podcast, Rabbi. So actually, the rabbi and I were talking about how many of us, when we get too busy, stop reading or stop doing wasting time activities. And that is actually the time when we're pondering fearlessly. I mean, we meander and we have ideas. And when people are fed up with what they're doing, so what would you do? Without any limits, what would you rather be doing? What do you ask people the big question without limits? And I think that's kind of fun. Well, speaking of limits, we're coming to a certain time. So, Mary, what would be some words of wisdom that you would share with all the listeners?
It's going to be repeating myself a little bit, but that central question, when you know it, and before I committed it to memory, I had it on sticky notes everywhere. It's astounding how often it is useful in big ways and small.
So what is it again?
Pardon?
What is the central question again?
Central question is, what choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? I mean, it can be, am I going to say that thing or am I not going to say that thing? Am I going to do this chore or not do that chore? Am I going to get involved in this association or not? I mean, it's just a way to purposefully think about the choices that we're making, and we have lots of them. And I think it's very empowering, and it also takes back our control is strong, our free will, I suppose. It's just we can decide what we're going to do.
Yeah, having a thought does not compel us to action. There's a concept.
Yeah, how about that?
Yeah,
and it doesn't make us inauthentic either.
No.
Correct.
So what is it you're doing for fun these days? What are you looking forward to doing?
Well, I mean, this might just be as boring as can be, but I love my work so much. it took me a very long time. I mean, I'm 61 now, and it took me a long time to get to the place where I know I'm doing exactly what I was put here to do. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So when I get to work with clients, when I get to have conversations like this, I'm just as happy as can be. Aside from that,
please.
I love my dogs, spending time. And I started a couple of hobbies because I've never been artistic. And so I've started to learn calligraphy.
Ooh.
And I'm doing this thing called Zentangle.
I don't know what that is. Let's pretend I don't understand it. What is it?
Zentangle is essentially it's artistic meditation, where you make designs on a 4-inch square of paper, and there's no way to do it wrong. And you do it in ink. There are no mistakes. But it's kind of a way to just immerse yourself in the little piece of work that you're doing, and know that you're not drawing specific pictures that are supposed to look like anything. It's designs. And so for someone who is fearful of making terrible art, it's a wonderful art form.
And the eyes are open?
Pardon?
The eyes are open when you're doing Zentangle?
Oh, yeah. It's literally, you're using these little micron pens, and you just draw designs. And there's a method behind it. There's actually a way to be a certified Zentangle teacher, but it's just a very meditative way to do art. And for someone who, I'm not artistic, I can write, but I've never been like visually artistic. And it kind of opens it up and says, well, yeah, I can be.
Well, how fun for you that you're branching out and doing these cool things. That's really neat.
They say about athletes, for instance, baseball players, many of them play golf. And they do it specifically because golf uses different muscles and different coordination than baseball. And so why should they be doing something like that? Because you have to develop the whole person. And so we always say, play to your strengths, do the things you're good at. And that may be true most of the time, but to not completely neglect those other parts of ourselves, because we need all of our brains, we need all of our bodies. We need to be integrated and holistic in what we do, and giving ourselves outlets that may seem a little frivolous may in fact be something that's serving us much more later in the work that is our most meaningful work.
So, Rabbi, what is your creative outlet these days?
My creative outlet, that's a good question. I should work on that.
You can ponder it.
I'll do that.
Yeah, I know you've been working awfully hard. It's funny, when we're on a path, sometimes we get so involved in it and maybe that's okay to do it, that you just focus on something for a while. I don't think we have to balance every moment nor every week. I think it's okay to dive into stuff and then take a break. I really don't think we have to have, total balance all the time.
Yeah, I think for me, it's really exercise. I work out 5 or 6 days a week. Yeah, and I can't miss it. It's so important to my health, not my physical health. I mean that too, but my mental health, to be able to have that time when I'm just by myself. I go downstairs in my basement. I have some rudimentary equipment, and just to have that time by myself, focusing on working up a sweat and getting my muscles working.
It clears the mind too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
For like all of us, like calligraphy. I mean, that's certainly a great way to clear the mind.
What would you think if someone said their hobby was sitting on their porch swing?
That's a fine hobby, because they're outside, they're seeing people and animals. I mean, I have my cup of coffee every morning with one of my daughters, wherever I'm visiting. And we call it either porch time or deck time, wherever we are. And we have a cup of coffee and we talk or we don't. And it's lovely.
I love that.
That anchors for me, the mid-morning, because I wake up super early, but it anchors my mid-morning,
Yeah, and Mary, you live in St. Louis, where I do, and the amount of days we can actually sit on the porch with amenable weather are pretty limited. So
Well, I'm in
when those
Michigan.
opportunities arrive, they're
I'm
priceless.
in Michigan. I think that even if it's really cold, it's like being camping. I mean, you just bundle up and go outside. I think it's very nice. I think that there's a lot of pressure to look productive. And so a lot of people lose productivity by working too hard. And I think we have to spend time wasting time and playing and be creative and doing things that don't look productive. I think it helps us be more productive.
In my book, I talk about how I'm not a fan of productivity. I mean, and then one of the reasons is because people don't ever think of a productive nap.
Well,
and
but
that can be very productive.
But if we have one of your famous mind shifts, they do.
Yes,
I think
exactly.
It depends on how we define productivity, but I think productivity is like my definition of being a grown-up. People who do what they need to do in a timely manner so they can play. And for me, productivity is the same as efficiency. You've got the systems, the people, the resources, the mindset, the processes and then you work at it and then you play. And I think we have to give ourselves that playtime. It's fascinating.
I agree. And that productivity is part of the process, not the end goal.
Yeah, I think so. So that you can have time to play. And, with COVID, the Rabbi and I started a bunch of new projects separately and together. And it's been interesting. It's been fun, but it's a lot of work. So we're both learning how to have more fun again. And we have fun, both of us, no matter what we do, but more on purpose fun, off task fun that I think has been very helpful to our thinking. So, well, you've been really generous with your time and we really appreciate your input. I can only see that your success will grow more and more. What is the best way to reach you?
Probably via my website, which is pretty easy. It's mckcoaching.com. And Mary in front of that, Mary @ is my email. So definitely, but you can contact me through my website and I'm happy to chat with anybody about this kind of stuff. Could talk all day.
And they can certainly explore your, the assessment.
For sure.
Where they are with their values and all. So that would be good.
Yeah.
Well, Rabbi, do you have any last words, sir?
No, I think we've left in a good place.
I think so too. Well, we thank everyone for being on this episode of the Rabbi and the Shrink with Mary Kutheis, learning about thinking and its importance to attach it to our values. And it can set you free. We'll see you on another episode of the Rabbi and the Shrink. Be well and have fun.
Thank you for listening to the Rabbi and the Shrink, Everyday Ethics Unscripted. To book Dr. Red Shoe, Dr. Margarita Gurri, or Rabbi Yonason Goldson as speakers or advisors for your organization, contact them at therabbiandtheshrink.com. This has been a Dr. Red Shoe production.